Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. Today we will be taking a look at the BANPRESTO Shin Godzilla Ichiban Kuji Torupaka Kamakura landing figure, which I think roughly translates to something like most lucky prize Kamakura landing figure. Feel free to correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong. This is a re-release of the original BANPRESTO lottery prize figure from 2016, released as the main prize in a lottery promoting the release of 2016's Shin Godzilla. In fact, I still remember that promo shots of the figure were some of, if not the very first, full-body images we saw of Shin Godzilla, specifically of his legs and feet. Before that, we had the leaked images of the upper torso maquette, which was unfortunately never used in the final film, and the then controversial official close-up of Godzilla's face, seen in many of the film's posters and merchandise. This re-release of the figure comes in 3 different paint variants, 2 of which I'm fortunate enough to own. This one, the Kamakura landing figure, is the closest to the first release, showcasing Shin Godzilla's final form as he makes landing in Kamakura City, hence the name. He is depicted in his classic charred black and red coloration. From pictures of the first release, I've determined that this one has an overall better paint job, whereas the first one had blotchy areas of pure red and brown color over areas of the arms and neck, which is not screen accurate. The other one I own is the heat ray radiation version. It's the exact same sculpt, but through the use of translucent plastic cast for the spines and a new paint job, depicts Godzilla with his body glowing a white purple, ready to fire his atomic ray. And then there's the final frozen variant, which I unfortunately do not have. This one, through grey dry brushing, depicts Shin Godzilla as seen nearing the end of the film, frozen by the Yashiori plan. These figures are soft vinyl statues, meaning they're non-articulated. They stand approximately 22 centimeters or 8 3/4 inches tall, and around 40 centimeters or 15 inches from head to tail, making them decently sized figures. The sculpt was done by the Japanese master sculptor Yuji Sakai. I've mentioned him before on my channel. He is most notable for his work in the popular SH MONSTERARTS line, as well as many exclusive X Plus figures and various model kits. He is also notable for creating concept designs of the Godzilla 2000 design. I've already gone over my thoughts on Shin Godzilla's design in some of my other videos, but I will somewhat briefly go over them here. I really love Shin Godzilla's design. To illustrate that point, here's my modest collection of Shin Godzilla figures. Like most people, I didn't immediately gravitate to the new design seeing those leaked images and early promo shots. But after seeing the design in its entirety and in motion, it really won me over. I love how unique this Godzilla is. So far from looking reptilian, yet so dinosaur-like, but not. It's so different from any creature design we've seen in years, but still so clearly Godzilla. I really like his unusual proportions. His small arms and creepy eyes, the huge tail, the legs, and the overall frame of the creature. I know for many fans these characteristics were, and still are, disliked. But to me, they define this version of Godzilla, and make him unique, yet still genuinely feel like the monster we know and love. I also really liked the way he moved in the film, and the overall skin texture that he had. There's a great behind-the-scenes story, where in the making of the film, the visual effects team originally intended to give Godzilla far more organic movements and texture, like that of an animal. However, director Hideaki Anno stepped in, wanting the creature's skin texture to appear to be that of rubber. This works so well in the movie, as even though the monster is 100% CG, it helps capture that feeling of watching a classic Godzilla film, as well as instilling a sense of otherworldliness to the character, as CGI is much better at convincingly imitating inanimate objects, making the scenes where Godzilla is only subtly and slowly moving look uncanny, and had you fooled into believing that there was something physical in front of the camera. Not to mention the outstanding cinematography that helped pull off this effect. Anyway, I've raved on about the design a bit too long. I do have much more I'd like to say about it, so I'll leave the rest to a future Shin Godzilla movie review that I've had in the works since the day I first saw the movie. Back to the figure. Unlike the original release, which came packaged in a clear clamshell briefcase, just like the 2017 Monster Planet Banpresto figure, which I recently reviewed, this one and the other two paint variants come packaged in large plain white boxes with nothing but Japanese print over them. Mine are packed away safely in the back of my cupboard behind all my other figure boxes, so I didn't want to rummage for them for this review as they're not particularly interesting. So most of the photos I've used are old ones from my Heat Ray variant and from elsewhere online, just to give you guys an idea. On a side note, I do highly recommend holding on to your figure boxes, if you can, because if you ever do want to resell these figures, buyers will be much happier to see a figure come in its own original box. And a lot of the time, these boxes are really cool and almost a part of the figure, making it worth keeping. If you are desperate for space like me, maybe get creative with storing your boxes, folding them up flat, putting one inside another, or only cutting out the side with pictures on it, depending on the box. I would never do that myself, but it's just something to think about. Diving into the figure itself, I'm going to start off with a relatively controversial statement and put forward that compared with figures of even twice the price range of this one, that this is currently the best Shin Godzilla figure out there. Trust me, I should know because I have most of them. I'll get to this point later in the review when I will go over the strengths and weaknesses of a number of the best 2016 figures out there and why this one stands out to me. But now I finally want to give this guy a proper review because I've already dragged this video out for a long time. Sakai beautifully pulled this sculpt off. Just looking at the form and deep organic hand-sculpted textures found throughout the figure, you can see his attention to detail and the skill that went into it. I'm really impressed with the way the sculpt is able to capture a sense of weight in the way the feet and legs are sculpted. Furthermore, that the tail continues to feel big and weighty, whilst perfectly capturing that hypnotic cat-like swaying we saw through the film in the way it's shaped and contoured, more so than any figure I've seen. He also captures that same uniform stance held in Shin Godzilla's upper body throughout most of the film, and even though his arms aren't in the more classic pose, palms facing up, they are beautifully and elegantly sculpted. I was genuinely surprised to see such small and thin detail so delicately cast in vinyl of this kind and on this scale. Overall, the texture of his whole body is deep and intricate, especially compared to that of figures like the Bandai vinyls or even ones like the MONSTERARTS. When you look really closely at the figure, you can make out the clearly hand-sculpted marks where the tools pressed into the clay. Yet when you look at it from a distance, it looks just like the monster stepped out of the movie. Looking at the focal points of this figure, meaning the spines and the face, the spines speak for themselves. We see that same level of detail and attention to the complexity of each individual spine. They are gorgeous throughout the figure, screen accurate, and well painted too, but we'll get to that later in the review. Shin Godzilla's face is very unique and one of the most challenging aspects of any 2016 figure to get right. His features are smaller and they look ill-defined in a messy-looking mass of a face with tiny needle-like teeth. Even though his features look random, it requires a very talented sculptor to capture these perfectly, otherwise the figure will end up looking off. Furthermore, the challenge of recreating Shin Godzilla's rows of thin, jagged, needle-like teeth is very limited even in the most high-end figures, especially of those in smaller scales, due to the material the figures are made of. Because of these challenges and limitations, and a minor paint issue which I'll get into later, the face is a touch off when looking at it from certain angles. However, this is the smallest complaint I could give this figure, because at this scale, in this material, the face and teeth are sculpted beautifully. Everything from his tiny eyes to his teeth are defined so well, even in the most close-up shots. He is all-round extremely film accurate, especially for a fully hand-sculpted and not 3D printed figure. To illustrate this, check out these side-by-side comparison shots of the CG model next to the BANPRESTO figure. Though the lighting and the angles are slightly off, you can still really see what I mean. As a last note on the sculpt, the bony tip of his tail is not as well defined as in some figures, like the MONSTERARTS. Other than that, the sculpt is strongly defined and all-round fantastic. Now to the paint. One of the most common complaints, and overall hardest parts, to get right on Shin Godzilla figures is the paint. As I've said in my earlier reviews of the Shin Godzilla BANDAI vinyls, these figures' paint jobs were almost doomed from the start to a certain extent, as it is very difficult to have a figure that is almost black, but with patches of bright, glowing red consistently visible throughout the naturally darker and harder to paint recesses of the figure. Luckily, this is one of the figures that does it right. With only some minor nitpicks, the BANPRESTO is painted perfectly. It's cast in a slightly translucent red plastic, much like the MONSTERARTS and X Plus figures. The majority of the figure is then evenly dry brushed in a deep charcoal grey, leaving the red plastic exposed, radiating from the creases. The effect, though still subtle, is much more noticeable than on most figures, and is very reminiscent of what we see in the film. The bony tip of his tail is dry brushed in a beige color, with much of the translucent red still showing. Shin's tiny eyes are painted very clearly, and his teeth are also individually well defined in a tan bone color. His claws and nails are really well done in a similar yellow tan color, with a nice gradient of darker shading at the base and the tips of his nails, showing an overall great attention to detail, and these are probably the best Shin Godzilla nails I've seen in a figure so far. Unfortunately, there are some spots on the tips of the nails where the paint has smudged or chipped off, showing patches of yellow on his otherwise well done claws. Though the red effect over the figure is really well done, it does somewhat negatively affect the face and upper neck. Looking at this close-up again, we see that in areas around the eyes and nostrils and under the jawline and crevices of the figure's face, we see that there is a lot of red present, which was simply not there in the film. This is a minor issue, but one of the figure's worst elements, unfortunately. Since I do own the figure, I may as well quickly bring up the heat ray version. Like I said, this figure uses the exact same mold as the Kamakura landing version. However, areas such as the spines and nails on the figure are cast in a translucent plastic. The spines are done in a violet, almost white-purple color, as well as over other parts of Godzilla's body. His overall colorization is slightly darker with much less red present over his body, but it is still present if you look closely. Luckily, this fixes the issue of the red around the eyes and neck of the other figure. And the translucent nails look really good and more bone-like. However, I do vastly prefer the Kamakura landing version as compared to the promo images of this figure, which looked amazing, promising deep purple translucent spines. In person, however, the effect is, well, less effective, for lack of a better word. The purple is less clear and strong, mostly washed over with a white violet-y color. There is a little bit of a metallic tinge, which is nice, but overall it's a shame because I did really love the deeper color they had in the promo images. That said, I'm still very happy with this figure, and even though I have thought about selling it, I can't bring myself to, as it is a unique and fantastic figure in its own way. Before I jump to comparing all the Shin Godzilla figures and concluding, we will take a break for everyone's favorite part of the review, the size comparison. Okay, so earlier I said that I'd go through a number of other Shin Godzilla figures to explain why I consider this the best Shin Godzilla figure out of those for even twice the price. I'm ranking these figures completely against my own personal preference, so I do apologize if you disagree. Whatever your thoughts, I'd love to hear about them and respond in the comments below. So here are some of my overall thoughts on a number of popular Shin Godzilla figures. First, the Bandai vinyls. Positives. These are relatively affordable and movie-accurate figures. However, the negatives are, they are heavily lacking in sharp details and have a lacking paint job. Basically, they are what they are. The next is the NECA figure. The positives. It's relatively affordable, at least in the US. Here in Australia, it's still $50, which is kind of bullshit. It's articulated and well painted. It has sharp details, and aside from the floppy tail, has a pretty solid feel. The negatives, however, the sculpt, the well-detailed looks amateur and is nowhere near screen accurate. Parts of the figure's head, the mouth membrane, the feet and the tail look way off, and in some cases just plain awful. Next is the SH MONSTERARTS. The positives. It is very well articulated and extremely screen accurate and well sculpted. Personally, this one is so close to being a tie for me with the BANPRESTO for the title of the best Shin Godzilla figure. I'm so sick of people bitching about the paint job of this figure, but that's for another review. The negatives, like I mentioned, it's been trendy recently to dislike the paint job of this figure and the figure in general. For some reason, I strongly disagree, but it's worth mentioning here. I will say that the skin texture on this figure is a little flatter than I would like, and on most other figures, and it is rather expensive, but still I'd say very worth it either way. And finally, there's the 25 centimeter scale X+. This is likely going to be the most controversial of my comparisons list, but bear in mind, completely my opinion, just go with it. Okay, so the positives. It's a very large, well-made figure with well-textured and strongly defined details, and the matte paint job is really good. Negatives. Okay, this is where it gets controversial, but just bear with me. Compared to figures like the BANPRESTO, MONSTERARTS, or pretty much any other large-scale X+ figures, the sculpt on this one though, well-defined and textured, feels off and is slightly amateur or rushed in comparison. Being a sculptor myself, I can tell. The shapes and forms of the creature are more rounded and clumped on. The natural elegance and sense of weight found in Sakai's sculpt is lacking. This is especially evident in the creature's feet and hands, having more simplified and rounded features. Look at how much detail and expression there is in the hands of the BANPRESTO in comparison to the X+. Bear in mind that the BANPRESTO is much smaller and made of a softer vinyl, making this all the more impressive. The same can be said for the face. Though I love the texture here and can clearly see that this is Shin Godzilla, the subtlety and personality of the design is far more apparent in the BANPRESTO. Even in its smaller scale, the needle-like teeth are well defined and convincing, while on the X+, I find that they are painted way too brightly and sculpted too thick, looking very overbearing on the overall sculpt of the face. Apart from that, the nose also looks way too broad. Otherwise, the face is overall well done. Anyway, don't get me wrong, I do really love the X+, like I do pretty much every Godzilla figure, but after having it so hyped up by overwhelmingly positive reviews, saying it looks so good in person, and by my overall expectations of X+ in general, I began to believe it, even though I was initially put off by the promo images. So I picked it up and was left a little disappointed when I did finally get the figure. And my final negative of this figure, and the main reason I feel that the rest of these negatives are so justified, is the price of the figure. This is easily the most expensive Shin Godzilla figure I own. I would also like to mention figures like the gigantic X+, the Kyoto maquette replica, and the upcoming 30cm X+ Shin Godzilla, which I think is also a Sakai sculpt, so I'm looking forward to that one. All of these would blow the BANPRESTO out of the water, but I omitted these due to their huge prices and my lack of owning any of them. In conclusion, each of these figures has its own strengths, and I commend each of them. They're all great in their own way, even surpassing the BANPRESTO in certain ways, like the X+'s size and paint, the MONSTERARTS screen accuracy, and even the NECA's paint, and the affordability of the Bandai vinyls. To me though, the BANPRESTO is the best middle ground of all of these features. Its sculpt is immaculate. Great care was taken with capturing a dynamic and screen-accurate portrayal of the character by a renowned and talented sculptor. The figure is large and has great presence on the shelf. The current price is even very reasonable, especially in comparison with the X+ and MONSTERARTS figures, considering what you get in terms of quality. The paintwork is some of the best we've seen on a Shin Godzilla figure, really capturing his burnt, radiating look as seen in the movie. Overall, this is one of my favorite figures that I have the pleasure of owning. I highly recommend it to any collector or fan, and I feel that it's very underrated and deserves more attention. Because of this, I'm going to introduce you all to something new on my channel. This is for when something gets my highest ranking, like a 10 out of 10 or an A+, but instead here, on Atomic Vinyl Reviews, we have the official Jet Jaguar seal of approval. And this figure gets it for sure. On the other end of the scale, we have the Soggy Noodles seal of shame. Shame on you, Soggy Noodles. But hopefully we won't be seeing that one too much. I can't wait to see what BANPRESTO does next with their figures. I'm really liking the stuff they're putting out recently. Last off, I would like to thank Dylan Newman for suggesting this review. I hope you're satisfied with it, man. Take care. And if anyone else does have any ideas for figures or movies they would like me to review, don't hesitate to put that in the comments below. Anyway, that's the review. Don't forget to check the description below if you liked any of the music or the figure displays here. I've got the links to the band page and to the Facebook Godzilla displays and custom effect parts group. So do check that out. See you at my next episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.